When I first bought the land, I wasn't thinking about homeowners associations, property committees, or anyone trying to tell me what I could or couldn't do. It was a quiet patch of earth, framed by tall pine trees, far from the neat rows of houses where HOAs usually roam. The property had been in the back of my mind for years, a tucked-away dream spot where I could one day build something small and simple, the kind of place you escape to when life in the city feels like it's closing in on you. For months, I sketched ideas for the cabin, nothing grand, nothing flashy. I wanted a place where you could hear rain tapping the roof and birdsong in the morning, a wooden deck that caught the afternoon sun, a little fireplace for cold evenings. Everything about the project felt personal, private, and entirely mine. I checked the deed and the property boundaries more than once, partly out of excitement and partly because I'm the kind of person who doesn't like unpleasant surprises. The map was clear. This land didn't belong to any planned community, no shared roads, no clubhouse, no pool maintenance fees. And certainly so when construction began, I didn't think twice about permissions or approval boards. Who would I even be asking? This was my land, and the only people I notified were the builder and the hardware store when I needed materials. The first weeks were bliss. I'd drive out on weekends to see the frame take shape, each nail and beam bringing me closer to a little refuge I could call my own. The smell of fresh-cut wood filled the air. The sound of hammers echoed through the trees. There was something pure about it, something almost old-fashioned, building with your own vision in mind. Not for resale value or curb appeal, but for your own peace of mind. I remember one Saturday morning in particular. I stood there on the raw, unfinished deck, looking out at the forest. The sun filtered through the leaves, and I felt this wave of satisfaction wash over me. I had done everything right. Bought the land fair and square, confirmed the boundaries. Even checked county records to make sure there were no easements or restrictions. I thought I was untouchable in the best way possible. Nobody's business but mine. That confidence made me a little naive, I'll admit. When you're out there, surrounded by nature, it's easy to forget how far some organizations will go to claim control. I figured the HOA world was something that belonged to suburbs and gated communities, places with manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and a board of people who argue about the shade of beige you're allowed to paint your shutters. That was a whole different universe from my property. I honestly believed with complete certainty that they had no authority over me because legally they didn't, so I poured myself into the work. I picked out reclaimed wood for the floors, imagining how the grain would look after a few winters. I chose a rustic, deep green paint for the exterior, thinking it would blend into the trees. The more I planned, the more I felt like I was carving out a piece of the world where I could finally breathe. Every time I drove away at night, leaving the cabin half done, I felt a pull to come back, not just to finish it, but to live in that space I was creating back then. The thought of an HOA showing up on my doorstep with demands and fines would have sounded absurd. They weren't even on my radar. I believed my boundaries, both physical and legal, were impenetrable. I believed my cabin was mine alone, safe from outside interference. That belief was my shield, and at the time it seemed unbreakable. Little did I know that shield was about to be tested in a way I never imagined. ***, I never expected trouble. The cabin was coming along beautifully, and I was excited to finally have a quiet retreat. Then one morning as I checked the mail, I found an official-looking envelope from the Homeowners Association. I hesitated before opening it, thinking maybe it was just a routine notice or some kind of newsletter. What I didn't expect was to see a demand for payment. A $30,000 fine for violating their rules. My heart sank. $30,000? For what? I scanned the letter carefully. It said my cabin was built without their approval, violated setback rules, and didn't meet community aesthetic standards. But something didn't sit right. I wasn't part of any HOA community. I had checked my deed, the county records, everything. This land was outside of any jurisdiction they claimed. To oversee, I immediately called their office, hoping to clear up the mistake. But the voice on the other end was firm, almost cold. They insisted the fine was valid and demanded payment within 30 days, threatening legal action if I didn't comply. The letter even mentioned late fees and liens on my property if the fine wasn't paid. I was stunned. How could this be happening? I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't even been contacted before the fine. No warnings, no prior notices. Just a sudden, massive bill that could ruin me financially. It felt like a trap, like some kind of power play from an organization that assumed control where it didn't belong. As days passed, more letters arrived, each one more aggressive than the last, repeating the same threats. I began to worry about the impact on my credit, my property rights, my future. I reached out to neighbors and local officials, hoping to find someone who had faced similar issues. But nobody seemed to know much about this HOA's claims. It became clear that the HOA was using intimidation tactics. They banked on people paying up out of fear or confusion rather than challenging the charges. I wasn't going to be one of those people. I started documenting everything, saving letters, recording phone calls, taking photos of the cabin and the surrounding land. I also began researching HOA laws and regulations in my county, determined to understand my rights and fight back. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. It was about standing up against an unfair system. I hired a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and HOA conflicts. Together, we reviewed the case and found multiple inconsistencies in the HOA's claims. The boundary maps they provided didn't match county records. Their bylaws didn't give them authority over my property, and there was no legal basis for such an enormous fine without due process. The more I learned, the more outraged I became. It wasn't just the amount of money, it was the principle of it. How could an organization overreach so blatantly and try to bully someone out of their rights? I shared my story online and found others who had similar experiences with overzealous HOAs trying to enforce rules beyond their power. With my lawyer's help, I prepared to challenge the fine legally. I sent a formal letter disputing the charges and demanding the HOA withdraw the fines immediately. The board didn't respond directly, but the tone of their subsequent communications shifted slightly, though the threats remained. This fine, once a shocking and frightening blow, became a catalyst. It pushed me to dig deeper, gather evidence, and prepare for a fight I never expected to have. What started as a peaceful dream cabin project was now a legal battle against an organization that had tried to claim power where it had none. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. The $30,000 fine was more than a number. It was a challenge to my rights, my ownership, and my peace of mind. And I was determined to prove that the truth was on my side. After receiving the shocking $30,000 fine, I knew I couldn't just accept it blindly. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, and I was determined to find out the truth. I began by reviewing every document I could get my hands on: property deeds, boundary maps, county records, and HOA bylaws. I was hoping to find a clear answer, something that would prove the fine was unjustified. At first, it was overwhelming. Legal jargon filled the pages. Boundaries were marked in tiny print, and maps showed lines and labels that meant little to me. But I kept digging. I reached out to the county office to request official maps and zoning information. I spoke with local surveyors and land experts, wanting their professional opinion on where my property lines actually lay and how they compared to the HOS claim territory. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together. The county records clearly showed that my land was well outside the limits of any planned community or homeowners association. The SOAS maps, which they had used to justify their fine, didn't match the official data. In fact, their claimed boundaries extended much farther than the legally recognized borders, encompassing areas they had no authority over. I also discovered that the HOS bylaws defined their jurisdiction very narrowly, limited strictly to a specific subdivision. My property was miles away from that, separated by undeveloped land and even a small creek. This meant that legally, the HOA had no right to enforce rules or levy fines on my cabin or my land. I shared these findings with my lawyer, who confirmed that the HOA's case was weak at best. The organization was overstepping its legal boundaries in an aggressive attempt to collect fines. It seemed like a classic case of an HOA is stretching its power too far, trying to assert control over areas simply because they could. Not because they had the right. Armed with this information, I felt a renewed sense of confidence. The fine wasn't just unfair, it was invalid. I started preparing a formal challenge to the HOA's demands, gathering official records, maps, and expert testimonies to support my case. I documented every interaction with the HOA, making sure to keep detailed notes and copies of correspondence. The investigation also opened my eyes to the importance of knowing your property rights and boundaries clearly. I realized how many people might fall victim to similar overreach without even realizing it. HOAs often have significant power within their neighborhoods, but that power must be confined to their legal limits. When they cross those lines, it becomes an issue of law, not just community rules. I felt relieved to have evidence on my side, but also wary. The OA board members were clearly motivated to collect this fine, and they might try to ignore or dispute the facts. It was clear this was not going to be a simple fix or a quick resolution. The whole ordeal turned into a kind of battle of maps and legal definitions. Every line on a map could mean thousands of dollars or the loss of my property rights. It was frustrating to have to fight so hard to prove something that should have been obvious, that my land was mine alone, outside their reach, but I was ready. With the facts on my side and a lawyer guiding me, I knew I had a strong case. The next step was to formally notify the HOA that their fine was invalid and prepare for whatever legal moves they might make in response. In the end, the investigation revealed something bigger than just a boundary dispute. It was a story about power, authority, and standing up for your rights against an organization willing to bend the rules to suit their agenda. It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest truths require the hardest fight to be heard, after gathering all the evidence, and confirming that the HOA had no legal authority over my property. I knew the next step was to take formal action. It wasn't enough to simply dispute the fine with phone calls or letters. The situation had escalated beyond that. The $30,000 demand wasn't just a mistake. It was a serious threat to my property rights and my peace of mind. I needed professional help to protect myself and fight back properly. Finding the right lawyer was crucial. I didn't want someone who would just handle the paperwork. I needed an expert in property law and HOA disputes, someone who understood the complexities of land boundaries and community regulations. I reached out to a few firms and eventually found a seasoned attorney who had successfully taken on similar cases before. From our very first meeting, I felt confident. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for justice, and my lawyer was ready to lead the charge. We spent hours going over every document I had collected: property deeds, county maps, HOA correspondence, bylaws, and the letters demanding the fine. My lawyer carefully reviewed the HOA's claims and their legal basis, or rather the lack thereof. Together we built a strong case proving the HOA's overreach. Their claimed jurisdiction didn't match the official boundaries, and they had no authority to impose fines on my property. Filing the lawsuit was both nerve-wracking and empowering. It meant taking the HOA to court and holding them accountable for their attempts to enforce rules where they had no right. The legal complaint detailed how the HOA's actions were not only unjust, but also violated my rights as a property owner. It demanded that the fines be rescinded and that the HOA cease all further attempts to interfere with my property. The lawsuit also sought damages for the stress, legal fees, and potential harm to my property's value caused by the unfounded fines and threats. I was ready to stand my ground and make sure this kind of intimidation didn't go unchallenged. Once the lawsuit was filed, the dynamics changed. The HOA board suddenly grew quieter. Letters and phone calls from them slowed down. It was clear they hadn't expected someone to push back so firmly. I began hearing through community channels that some board members were worried about the case and what it could reveal about their overreach throughout the process. My lawyer kept me informed at every step, explaining court procedures, timelines, and possible outcomes. It was a complex legal system, but having an experienced guide made it manageable. I learned a lot about my rights, the importance of documentation, and how to navigate disputes with organizations like HOAs. The lawsuit wasn't just about me anymore. It became a stand against a pattern of abuse by the HOA, a warning to others who might be unfairly targeted in the future. I shared updates on social media and connected with other homeowners facing similar issues, creating a small but growing community demanding fairness and transparency. Court dates were set and preparations began. My lawyer gathered expert witnesses, including surveyors who could testify about the true property boundaries and the limits of the HOA jurisdiction. We also prepared statements from local officials confirming the official records. Facing the legal challenge was daunting, but I never lost sight of why I started this fight: to protect my land, my rights, and my peace. The lawsuit was more than paperwork. It was a statement that no one could bully me into paying unjust fines or controlling my property without a legal basis. Even as the case progressed, I remained hopeful. I knew the law was on my side and that standing up to powerful organizations was never easy, but sometimes necessary. The experience changed me. It taught me resilience, the value of knowledge, and the importance of standing firm in the face of unfairness. Whatever the outcome, I was proud to have taken a stand. I wasn't just defending a cabin in the woods. I was defending the principle that property rights matter and that abuse of power must be challenged. The lawsuit was my way of saying, I will not be silenced and I will fight for what's rightfully mine. After the lawsuit was filed, the atmosphere surrounding the HOA board changed dramatically. What began as a simple dispute over a fine quickly morphed into a high-stakes legal battle that threatened to unravel the entire leadership of the organization. The court case not only challenged their authority over my property, but also cast serious doubts on the credibility and practices of the board members themselves. As the case progressed, details emerged that painted a troubling picture of how the HOA had been operating. Evidence showed that the board had consistently overstepped its boundaries, enforcing rules far beyond their legal jurisdiction. Documents that were supposed to be transparent and available to homeowners were either incomplete or deliberately obscured. This raised serious questions about the board's governance and whether they had been acting in the best interests of the community or simply trying to exert control for their own benefit. The lawsuit exposed how the board had relied on outdated or incorrect maps to justify their fines, ignoring official county records. This wasn't just a clerical error. It suggested a pattern of negligence or even intentional misinformation. Homeowners in the broader area began to voice concerns, some coming forward with their own stories of unfair treatment and unexplained penalties. The case became a catalyst for a wider examination of the HOA's practices. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The HOA's lawyers scrambled to defend their position, but the mounting evidence made their arguments increasingly weak. Witnesses called by my side, including surveyors and legal experts, clearly demonstrated that the board had no rightful claim over my property. Every piece of testimony chipped away at the foundation of the HOA's authority. Public opinion also started to sway. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle between an individual homeowner and a powerful, overreaching association. Social media buzzed with discussions about HOA abuses and the need for greater accountability and reform. The board members, once confident behind closed doors, now faced public scrutiny and criticism. The legal pressure brought calls for the board to resign or face removal. Meetings that were usually routine turned heated, with residents demanding transparency and changes to prevent similar abuses in the future. The court case shone a harsh light on governance failures that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. For the board, the stakes were higher than just this one lawsuit. Their reputations, positions, and influence within the community were all on the line. If the court ruled in my favor, it could set a precedent that limited their power and forced a restructuring of how the HOA operated. The possibility of financial penalties and legal consequences for board members themselves loomed throughout the ordeal. I stayed focused on the bigger picture. Winning wasn't just about getting the fine overturned, it was about holding the board accountable and protecting other homeowners from similar experiences. The court case had become a turning point, forcing the HOA to confront its own shortcomings and pushing the community toward greater fairness. In the end, this legal battle was about more than a cabin or a fine. It was about the principle that organizations entrusted with authority must wield it responsibly and within the bounds of the law. The credibility of the HOA board was on trial, and the outcome would resonate far beyond my property lines.